guys, welcome to the Radiate Your Faith podcast. My name is Matie and I'm a college softball player from the great state of Texas. And I'm so excited that you are tuning into the Radiate Your Faith podcast, where I hope you are encouraged to let the light of Christ shine through you in a way that allows people to see God through the way that you walk with Him. My prayer for you is that your faith is deepened, that it is strengthened, and that you are encouraged to radiate your faith. Hey guys, welcome to the next episode of Radiate Your Faith. I'm so glad you guys are tuning in for another podcast, and I'm so excited about our episode today because I have one of my favorite people on the planet here to visit me, and I'm just going to let her introduce herself to you guys.
Alrighty, well, my name is Julie. I am a recent college graduate. I love the Lord. I love speaking about things that matter. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about relationships and things and just the way to go about that. But just one of the things I'm passionate about is just showing people how to value things as God does, and relationships are a huge part of that. So like Maddie says, we've been pals for a while now, and I'm just really excited to jump into it.
Yeah, and one of my favorite things about knowing Julie and getting to know Julie is I actually remember first day I met Julie, we were at a Bible study group with our church from back when I was in Waco, and we were kind of going around introducing ourselves, and we started getting into the Bible, and this girl, I look over and she's like, okay guys, sorry, I got to sit on the floor and read the Bible. And I was like, what? That is so cool. Cause I don't know. I read the Bible like on my bed or like at a table. She sits on the ground, and I think that's the coolest thing. So,
well, it's just a habit that I got into. I don't really remember exactly how it came up. I just found, I think I read something once about like the posture of prayer, like the posture of worship. And I just got it into my head, like I should have a specific position for worship or for prayer or reading my Bible, just so that I have something that I can actually like physically get into. And some people think that's like, getting down on your knees or finding a specific place in your house. For me, it's sitting on the floor.
that's so cool. I love that. But yeah, we met when I was in college. You were a part of the church. She was a part of the church that I was attending at the time, and she's a worship leader, amazing singer. Oh my gosh, she's so good. So I'm very excited to be having her on today, and we are going to be talking about navigating the dating world as a Christian, which I think is a very good thing to be talking about. And we've had many conversations about this, just because the world likes to perceive dating in this way that isn't biblical. Like it's very like all of these young girls, all these young guys are getting their like idea of what dating should be from the internet or from movies. And that's so unrealistic, and it's so different from what God designed it to be. So I think this is a great conversation to be having, and it's something that a lot of people need to hear. So as we go about this topic, we're going to be kind of covering three different bases. We're going to be talking about becoming the person God's calling you to be before you meet your person, then what we should be looking for in a potential spouse, and how we should be dating. So this is going to be a very good conversation.
It's going to be a lot. We're going to try and get through it.
Yes, we are. It's going to, who knows? Her and I can talk. We'll go to Sonic, like in college. We go Sonic, sit and talk for hours till the lights went out and they basically kicked us out.
To meet at like 7:30 or 8, and we'd be there till like 11.
Yeah,
it flies by.
We can talk, and we will talk. So this is going to be great, but let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to cover is becoming the person God's calling you to be before you meet them. And I think a lot of people like to wish away the singleness season. As somebody who is single, it is a very hard, lonely feeling season of just waiting for God to bring somebody. And it's a season of life that's really easy to wish away or to be angry about or frustrated about. And what I've been learning through the season of singleness is just that it's not a time to waste or be frustrated or mad at God. And I'm seeing this more as I go about my season of singleness, because He's been teaching me so many different things about love and preparing me for a godly relationship that glorifies Him, that I wouldn't get to experience if I didn't learn those things on my own and just walking with Him by myself. So I think one of the most important thing you can do when you're waiting to meet your person is to understand God's design for love. And a lot of people don't understand God's design for love. And the best way to go about that is to get in the word, to know God's heart and understand what he designed love to be.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to research and look into, as just like a Christian in general, is knowing more about who God is. Because as Christians, we're supposed to reflect him in every single way. We're supposed to become more like him in our walks, just as people, as Christians, but specifically when it comes to, navigating what you're looking for in your person, or, just looking for relationships in general. The time for singleness is really useful for, just like what you're saying, just building yourself into the image of Christ, building yourself into the person that you would want to date, or building yourself into this person that does reflect God. Because once you're reflecting God, you're going to give a more accurate picture of love, because Bible says literally right in there, like, God is love. And so if we base our picture of what love is off of who God is, then that's going to give us a lot better place to work from as we're looking for someone to share that love with. And like you said, the world gets it so wrong about what love looks like. People think it's, physical satisfaction, just like sleeping around. If that's, what you think is love, then go for it. If you feel like, maybe you're pursuing love of things or of material goods, that's not actual love. Like, when you experience who God is fully and personally, you get a new definition of love, because now you understand God better, and you understand what it says in Corinthians, where love is patient, love is kind, it's not self-seeking. All these things that, people have memorized and hang on plaques, and you walk around Hobby Lobby and you
they're all over the place.
All over the place. But you actually understand the meaning behind what each of those words. You understand what patience is fully, and you understand what self-sacrifice is. And understanding who God is the start of that.
Oh, yeah. And I think another big thing too is when you do understand God's design for love, you really get to experience what love is. Like, God designed love to be unconditional. And I think that's where the world gets it wrong a lot, is they think, oh, well, if you don't make me happy anymore, like I don't love you anymore. And it's not about a feeling, it's about a choice to choose to love somebody regardless of, what time they wake up in the morning, or how crazy their hair looks, or how angry they make you. It's not a feeling, it's a choice, and it's unconditional, and that's how it's supposed to be. So just knowing God's design for love is super important. I think another thing you can be doing is ask yourself the question, how are you preparing for your future spouse? Whenever you think of, this guy that you want to marry, or this girl you want to marry, you're like, oh, well, they're going to wake up in the morning and they're going to read their Bible, and, they're going to pray all day, every day. And, they're going to do
we're going to go to church 3 times a week. We're going to be missionaries. We're going to
you have all these ideas and these thoughts, and you're like, oh, it's going to be this person that's just, doing XYZ. But then you can turn around and ask yourself, are you waking up in the morning and reading the Bible every single day? Are you doing all these things that you picture your future spouse to be doing? Like, is that something you're pursuing? Are you becoming better for the person that you want to marry? And I think that's a really good way to check your heart, is just like, am I even waking up and reading the Bible first thing?
And it's really important, like, especially when thinking about a God-honoring relationship or marriage, because both of you are very marriage-minded, and we'll kind of get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But kind of, building yourself into that person that is marriage material, for lack of a better term. Basically, as women, we're looking for the specific guy that's going to lead us in the things that we want. We want to be spiritually led. We want to be physically protected. We want all these things. But really, like, are we willing to follow that? Like, are we willing to submit to that? And that's a part that is really helpful to work on during, like, your singleness time. Growing up, Mom always taught me that I could practice on my siblings. Not really like practice being married,
but kind of weird.
Just like working on the skills that you're going to need in a marriage. You're working on being patient. You're working on, if you want your sibling to do well and succeed and be someone that you can follow. Like, I've always admired my brothers. I've looked up to them my entire life, and they've always been worthy of filling that role. So for my place and my position, am I one, worthy to follow that, and am I willing to follow that? But then also, am I somebody that they can look back and be proud of that?
Right.
Because it's a partnership. In
Yep.
a marriage, it's not just this is her job, this is his job, and you're both individually just doing your own things, doing your jobs. It's really this partnership that you're supposed to be intimately connected, and you're supposed to be supporting each other.
Yeah.
So as you're thinking through, what do I want in this guy? I want him to be active in reading his Bible. I want him to be active in church. It's like, okay, are those habits that you're also bringing to the
Right.
table?
Right. So good. And I think that also just leads into the next point of are you preparing yourself for an imperfect person?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a long time when I was, imagining who I was going to marry, I was imagining, Lucas Till. I don't know if any of you guys know who that is, but he's basically he's the cowboy from the Hannah Montana movie. My celebrity crush. Anyways, I was imagining this, Lucas Till guy who hung the moon, did everything right, pursued God like perfectly. And that's such an unrealistic expectation. Like in movies, whenever we watch romance stuff, we, see like, oh, like they're gonna do all these cute romantic things. And so whenever you get into an actual relationship and they aren't doing XYZ that you see in the movies, you're like, what? Like this is what?
You're
Like
not
you're not
doing
perfect.
part.
Yeah. So it's like, what? And it's really given me a heart check of, are you preparing for an imperfect person? Because the only perfect part of your relationship is going to be God. And that's part of why it's so important to be equally yoked and that sort of thing. But I think the last point you need to cover and really check your heart on before you meet the person is ask yourself, are you in a place where they're going to be filling a void or a role that they shouldn't be? Like, are you at a place with God where you're fully satisfied in him and you're not looking to your future boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse to be playing God in your life where they can't be? Because again, they're imperfect and if you put all of like your value, your worth into that person and you let them dictate who you are or how beautiful you are, any of those things, you're going to be majorly heartbroken, majorly disappointed, majorly let down because they're not God and they're not supposed to be. They're not supposed to fill that role. And if you're not at a place of knowing that and just knowing that God needs to be your savior, your only savior, the only thing that gives you value, it's a very dangerous thing, a very hard place to put somebody, and it's not fair to the other person too. Like,
yeah, that's definitely a huge weight, is expecting so much of the other person, especially when you're not bringing your own side to the table, but just to be expecting that in your head, even if you don't act on it. Like you don't, because with my experience, I don't try and actually say the expectations that I have of people. They just kind of go on in my head, and that's almost worse because now you've got this image that isn't reality that you're trying to portray. And even if you're playing your own part, if the other person doesn't match, then you've got this disconnect between reality and what's happening in your head.
yeah,
And it makes you devalue the other person as a person because, whoever this guy is that you're interested in or that you're building in your head, you don't recognize that he's actually a real person out there. And that's something that I realized a little bit ago, like somewhat recently, is that somewhere out there, God is preparing my husband, and he's an actual person.
Yeah.
Like he's actually
he's not made up.
No, he's not just this perfect guy in my head. Like he is an actual man who is struggling with his faith the same as I am, who is growing, who is learning, who has a family, who has likes and dislikes,
Who isn't perfect.
Yeah, he's a sinner too. And when we get together, we'll do sin together. Like that's a horrible way to think of it. But
That's funny.
as people who live in a broken world, there's always going to be these broken things. There's always going to be disagreements. There's going to be a certain amount of suffering, and especially when it comes to relating to people or trying to build relationships, it's really difficult to work through those things because the sin is what's going to trip you up. And if you're creating this perfect person that doesn't actually exist, one, like I said, you're devaluing the person that's eventually going to be in front of you, if that's what God has for you. But then the second thing with that is that you're not actually viewing people. Like you're not viewing reality. You're not viewing the world as the broken world that needs Jesus as it is.
Yep. And you can even be putting that person on a pedestal that they're just going to fall off of, which, funny story. In middle school, I had a crush on this guy so bad. Guy didn't even know I existed. Had such a big
Isn't that always the story?
It always is. Yes. And oh my goodness, I had the biggest crush on him. And, as I got older and I actually started to get to know him, the guy that I liked, thought I'd liked wasn't the same guy who I sat and talked to, a couple years later. Like, it was like, I almost like had a crush, or I liked this fake reality in my head of this guy that wasn't actually him. And
Yep.
I think it's important too, not to be, living in this fantasy world of like, oh, well, there's potential for him to do this and do this and do this. Like, we could
The
get married.
potential guy.
Yeah. Like, you see
Yeah.
potential in somebody, but you shouldn't be marrying potential. Like, you need to be looking at, okay, in our actual relationship, what has happened? Who is this person? Not who is this, who I think this person could be. I think that's important too. So kind of going into the next step of what we should be looking for, what do you think is the most important thing we should be looking for in a future spouse?
So it does kind of look different in practicality for everybody, because not every lifestyle is the same. But the quality that I say always look for, number one, must be a believer. Like, that is baseline. And that's something that often people get a little bit tripped up on, because if somebody says, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, then it's like, okay, check that box, moving on to the next thing. But like, actually invest in that. Something that I personally like to do is ask for their testimony. Just share how Jesus saved you. How is he working in your life? What is he doing now? Just share your testimony with me. And I think that's something that's really very sadly lost in modern, specifically dating. Like, it's basically non-existent. But even just in churches and building general relationships, is that we have this lack of just sharing our testimony. So that's something that I personally really like to do, is just, if you're in like a group setting, or there's interest, or if you're on a date or whatever, just ask for the testimony. Ask, who is Jesus to you? And that'll give you a better read on, where their spirituality is at, where is their faith at. Because if they start going into like, oh, well, I've kind of always been a Christian, and like, I go to church. So
yeah, and
there's that.
And it's so important to note too, that just because somebody goes to church does not mean they're pursuing God. And I didn't realize that growing up. I dated a guy, who went to church but didn't really pursue God. And I was like, well, I can check, like you said, I can check the box. Oh, he's like a Christian. He says he goes to church. And, the further I got into that relationship, it's just so funny, because he was kind of like the guy I, imagined, like, would pick for myself out of a crowd. Like, he looked the way that I imagined my future husband he would look. He, had a cute dog, and all the things he did. I was like, oh, well, those are things I'm interested in. So I was like, oh, this is like checklist perfect, except for this one thing that I thought was checked, which was that he was a Christian, went to church. That was like, yeah, he did go to church, but he didn't have a relationship with God. And so he didn't know how to love me right. And it was a very difficult situation just to be in, very hard situation to be in, because when somebody doesn't know God and they don't know how to love you, it's never going to be enough, which obviously no relationship's ever going to be enough besides your relationship with God. But if God is not the core, the foundation of your relationship, it's not, you're going to feel so distant from God. And that's how it felt, was time with him was time away from God. And I wanted those two things to be intertwined. And since he didn't have a relationship with God, those two things were separate, and it pulled me away from him. And that's not what I wanted. And that's what's going to happen if you just look at, oh, like, he goes to church, check. Like, it's so much deeper than that. And if they don't understand love, they're not going to love you right. And that's not what God wants for you. That's not how he designed love to be.
No, because he, like you said, love is unconditional, and God is love. So he wants us to experience that in the right way. And if somebody isn't, pursuing God, who doesn't have that right view of love, like I said, it's not going to work, because he's not going to be able to love you in that way that God desires you to be loved.
Yeah. Yep. Anything else that you think?
Well, so for me, really, it's more looking at the character qualities. I used to have this like idea of the perfect guy, like on a piece of paper where I just like write it down. Like we'd have a big ranch house with like a porch that
Every
goes
girl's
around, and, like a
dream.
white picket fence, and we have horses, and we go to church every day, and like all these different things. But what I've kind of narrowed it down to are the character qualities that are really important to look for. Absolutely, 100% pursuit of God. Like that is first. Secondary to that are going to be the characteristics that you see in God, in Him, because in the analogy of marriage, the man is supposed to represent Christ, right? So the important qualities that I've picked out that are really very telling of somebody. One of the things that I like to look for is, how do you treat people that can't give you anything back? So how do you treat children? How do you treat the people, like if you're working with children really can't give any benefit to an adult man. Like they can't add to his career, they can't add to his finances.
Mm-hmm.
They're not really a peer, like a discipleship type relationship. So there's not a ton that kids can add to his life. But how does he treat children? Does he value children as God does? Does he treat them well? Is he kind to them? Is he gentle? And that's the other thing, like children, I usually go children and old people, because those are the two ends of the spectrum that, it's not often that they can add to a young up and coming man's career or finances or whatever, just like his general role in life. So how does he treat the people that don't give anything back to him? Does he do things expecting to get things back?
Right.
Does he, do things solely for the purpose of making himself look good? Why does he do the things that he does? Is it to bring glory to God? Is it to serve others? Or is it to lift himself up? So that's something that is really important to just look for. Specifically, the way to look for that is see how he treats people that can't do anything back for him. And then the last one, finances are a huge thing for some reason in a lot of man relationships.
I wish I got, like, for me, okay, this is so bad. Like, my perception of money is just not there. Like, I just don't ever think about money as, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just like a me thing, but I'm just like so invested in the person. I'm just like, money, which I'm sure that will change. I'm sure it's going to change when I get older, and I get married and I'm on my own. But like, until then,
well, honestly, just give it all to God and He'll work it out.
That's kind of like what I was thinking,
That's the way to go. But the way that a guy spends his money is going to tell you a lot.
Yeah.
Is it something that he gives to the Lord? And tithing is something that, Christians kind of go back and forth on, like how much, how often, and there's room for discussion there. But is it something that he's doing? Is he supporting the church? Is he supporting people? Does he support others around him? Is he a gift giver? Or is he somebody that is looking to build up his bank account? Is it something that he's stingy with? And that can go for anything, any material possessions. Has he given everything over to the Lord for God to use for his glory to uplift everyone around him? Or is it something that he's trying to build his self-image, to make himself into the man that he thinks he wants to be, as opposed to who God wants him to be?
That's good. Yeah. Oh, and I think it's interesting too with like the whole concept of money, or just like if a guy doesn't like know God and go to him in the middle of hardship, like what's he going to turn to whenever things go bad? If he doesn't know God, like he could go to money, go to buying things, go to other women, like different things. And I think, like the finances, that will reveal that, like what a guy spends his money on.
And that's an excellent point too, is what does he go to when he's sad, when he's nervous, when he's angry? Does he turn to alcohol? Does he turn to other women? Does he turn to other men? Does he turn to the church? Does he turn to the Bible? Like, where does he turn to when he's feeling like he needs direction? Who does he ask for advice? Those are really important things to know as well, because those are things that are going to be establishing, continuing the habits that he has right now, but then also in building new habits in a new marriage or a new relationship. You really want to know where that's going to be headed. Yeah.
And I think for me too, when I think of, what I look for in somebody, I'm really looking for a person who's going to be intentional and be a good leader. I think those are two things I really think about. Like, I think maybe it's just me. Again, I don't know. It could just be me, but I'm like, I think the guy should be pursuing the girl, because it shows initiative. It shows that they're intentional with
Mhm.
you and that they want to lead you. And so I think that's important, is just a
Mhm.
guy who's going to pursue you and be intentional with you and want to lead you the way that God designed him to. So that could be a whole nother video, but we'll
They're
just,
all like all of these could be
I
harder.
know we could go so in depth with these, but we won't for your sake, because we could again talk for hours. It'd be like a movie. So last kind of point I want to cover is, how should we be dating? And I'm gonna let Julie kind of talk about this 3-step thing, because her and I, while we were at Sonic, had this conversation about how the world dates versus how God designed dating to be. And she has this great thing. So I'm just gonna let her take the floor on this.
Okay, so this is still kind of sketchy and it's not 100% perfected, but I kind of had this laid out. I have a pretty methodical mind. I really like to view things as very logical and step by step. Doesn't always translate that way, but within the context of relationships and how the world views relationships and the dating process specifically, versus how I believe that a Christ like dating viewed through a Christ lens would look like. There's these 3 different steps. There's the, do I want to marry you? And this is also within the context of dating to marry,
Hmm.
which we'll kind of cover in a second. But if you're looking to date somebody and then potentially marry them in the future, there's this general 3-step process that most people are familiar with. You meet the person and you say, do I want to marry this person? You become best friends. You spend a lot of time together. You look at, the way their life is going. You see how you connect. You evaluate the chemistry. And basically you just decide, like, do I want to marry you? And then there's this next step of, okay, so now we're getting a little bit more serious. Should I marry this person? And that's where you bring in like the lifestyle things. Like, okay, so where do you see your career going? What do you want to do as far as education? Looking towards the future, what does that look like? Just those general questions, just to say, like, is this something that I should be intentionally pursuing? Is this something that I should be looking into? And then you get to the, can I marry you? So it's a 3-step process. Do I want to marry you? Should I marry you? And can I marry you? And that's like the deal breaker stage. That's where you talk about the things that are super critically important. That's where you meet the family. That's where you decide, like, okay, are we getting engaged and getting married, or what are we doing? Like, this is the final step before engagement or before marriage for most people. And I think that's completely backwards, because if you decide first, do I want to marry this person, you're investing so much emotional time and energy into just this person, as just a friend. And then once you get that emotional connection established and it becomes deeper and more intimate, then you go into this, should I? And then that's when the more important things come up. Whereas I always lead with the important things, because I, for one, don't want to get my heart broke.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's no fun.
Hmm.
But then in addition to that, it's really just establishing those, like we've been talking about through this entire time. Is this a person that I can follow? Is this a person who's going to lead me towards Christ? And that's something that you need to know first. So in that 3-step approach, reverse it and start with the, can I marry you? Like, are you a Christian? If kids are something that's really important to you, talk about kids. If alcohol is something that's really important to you, talk about alcohol. If politics are something that's going to be important to you, talk about it. That's where, I scare away a lot of people this way, but talk about that on the first date, the second date, the first conversation you have. And it doesn't have to be this intense interview session where you just sit down and grill them on, like, these are all the important
Oh yeah.
things.
Oh,
But just in
you don't like chicken strips? You're gone.
No. Chick-fil-A,
Oh,
that's my
wow, that's a deal breaker.
But in evaluating, like, is this somebody that I want to emotionally invest my time? And honestly, like, as women, we're investing a certain amount of our spiritual walk into them, because
Yep.
we're evaluating, are you going to lead me towards Christ?
Hmm.
And so we start adopting some of their habits. We start, saying, like, okay, so what would it look like if you were leading me? What would our life together look like? We almost naturally fall into that somewhat submissive role. Not necessarily that, like, he becomes the boss immediately,
Right.
but it's something that we desire to be
Mhm.
led and protected and cared for.
And I think too, there's like a lot of people are very touchy on the whole like submit to your husband
Yeah.
thing, because they think that somehow makes him above you, which is just not the
Mm-mm.
case. And I think or someone had worded this so well. They had said, a man needs to be somebody worth submitting to and just walking with each other in that sort of way. It's not like he's so much better than me, I can't say any words, like he has to. It's not supposed to be like that.
Cowardly. It's something that you do to support the person that you love. And it's, like I said, it does feel natural when love is properly applied. The leadership and submission roles, they're so easy. And I see this exemplified in many older couples that I know, my parents specifically.
Okay guys, so my video cut out at like 29 minutes, so the rest of the podcast is just gonna be the audio, but I just thought I'd let you guys know that, because I was gonna, we could refilm it, but like the Holy Spirit was moving, so we're just gonna leave it in. So yeah, here's the rest of the episode.
The leadership and submission roles, they're so easy. And I see this exemplified in many older couples that I know, my parents specifically, where I always knew that dad was the leader of the household. Even though mom did the majority of the household tasks, she kind of led the household. I always knew that she submitted to dad's authority because it was this partnership. It wasn't that dad was better than her. It wasn't that he was like somehow the boss
above her.
No, but they have different roles and different needs, and they help to complement each other and fulfill those needs together. So that's why I think it's really important to start with those. Can I even marry? Can I even consider a possible future with somebody? And that's where, like, the initial like heartbreak happens usually. Because in the world's way of dating, when you go through this, do I want to? You're just keeping it casual. You're keeping it fun. Like,
you're building up all those emotions.
You're getting emotionally invested, and you're getting bonded with this person that you don't even know at this point sometimes if they're a Christian. Like, I've had Christian friends that they're going out with this guy and everything seems to be going great. They're so happy. It's fulfilling. This is amazing. And then I'm like, okay, is he a Christian?
Yeah.
You haven't really mentioned that.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. And then it leads to this just massive heartbreak, because as Christians, our identity in Christ is something that's so incredibly important. And rightly so, it should be. But when we're with somebody that we've been going down this path of, I really, really, really want to make this work. That's when trouble happens, because you start neglecting the things you totally forgo the should I, and you forgo the can I, and you just say, but I want to. And so you skip over all of those important things that you should have discussed before. And I don't like put a label on like discuss exactly these things and give you a checklist, but make sure that and it's useful in that singleness time too, to determine what's going to be important to you, so that you can be ready to say, these are my 3 or 4 things that are incredibly important. And if this is going to continue, if we're going to start dating, if we're going to pursue any kind of future together, I really think we should be on the same page about these. Because in the long run, that's going to set up your relationship a lot better, because you're starting from the same place. Yeah,
that's so good. That is so good. And I think, even talking about going in the order you talk about, that's another way of guarding your heart. And I think it's really easy to not guard your heart, because you're like, oh, like I want to just, we'll get to the Christian part whenever, but when you do build those bonds, that like emotional relationship, you're setting yourself up for an even bigger heartbreak than you would have if you would have started with the, can I date you? The harder questions first. And it's super important to guard your heart. And I even think if you're a single girl, and you are desiring to get married, or be in a relationship, and it's like hard for you right now, and you're going through that season, get away from the romance movies, get away from the romance music, because that's just going to make you more frustrated with God. And I remember my best friend Tori, she had told me that she was taking a break from movies and that, like romance movies, and I was like, girl, what? Like, I'm gonna be watching rom-coms, like, why are you? No way. And I would like kind of notice, as I would watch more romance movies, books, read books, listen to songs, I would be more frustrated. And I was like, you know what, maybe I'll like do what she did. And I cut him out for like a month. And now I am just like, I love being single. I'm going to walk with the Lord. It's so good. And I would just, recommend like, take a break from those things, cut those things out that make you so frustrated with God, because the season that you're in is a gift, and it's going to grow you in a way that is going to be even more prosperous in the future. And there's a verse in the Bible, I'm going to misquote it so bad, but it basically talks about like preparing before you build your house.
Mhm.
I'll have to like put like, I don't know. I'll have to like put it in there, like
Like
what
find
verse it
it.
is. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think that's such a good like depiction of what we need to be doing with relationships with people is,
Mhm.
are you preparing before you're starting to build the house? Like, have you
Right.
even built the foundation? Do you have a foundation established before you're starting to build on it? Because it's going to
Mhm.
fall if you don't.
Right.
So I think that's a very good thing to cover. And I think this is also a great way, from what you had been talking about, to kind of go into the whole conversation of dating to marry.
Mhm.
Because when I was growing up, going to church, before I really knew God, I'd always hear, you need to date to marry. And I thought dating to marry was just not having sex, and that was it. Like, that's
Yep.
what I thought dating to marry was.
Yeah.
So I would get in relationships with people and be like, oh, like, I'm not going to have sex with you, but like, I'm dating to marry, but like I wouldn't be,
Mhm.
because I would be like, I could just never see myself with this person. So it's very
Mhm.
counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but we hear it in the church a lot is, date to marry, but what does that mean?
So dating to marry is not just don't have sex before marriage.
Yes.
Like, that
Yeah.
is absolutely
Ha.
false.
If you learn anything.
Let's squash that right now.
Yeah.
Dating to marry it's starting with those important questions.
Yeah.
Dating to marry is saying, I value my relationship with God and my future marriage so much that I'm going to put that before my temporary pleasure.
Hmm.
This guy who's super cute, seems to be okay. We haven't really talked about Christian stuff, but he likes music, or he has a dog or whatever. He checks all the boxes of what I would see myself with. Even that can be counterintuitive to dating to marry,
Yep.
because you're still basing it off of your own checklist.
Yeah.
You're not basing it off of what a marriage and a partnership is going to look like. You're basing it off of what I want out of marriage. So dating to marry, it's looking towards your future and recognizing that a marriage is going to be about sacrifice.
Hmm.
You're preparing for that imperfect person. You're preparing yourself to marry that imperfect person, but then also working to fulfill your own role in a marriage from the beginning.
Hmm.
So when you're deciding who to date, you're actually looking towards the future of, is this someone that would be my future husband or my future wife? And somebody told me something a little while ago, a good friend of mine, and we actually dated for, I don't know, like a month, like short. We're still good friends now. But he told me something that it stuck in my mind. As we were sitting down to dinner, we were just discussing different important things, and he said, I want to respect you as a person, first and foremost, and as a Christian and as a woman, but I also want to respect you in light of the fact that I might be talking to somebody else's wife.
Yep.
Like,
Wow. That's such a,
that
wow.
was the first time I'd ever heard that, and it was just so profound and so sobering for me,
Hmm.
because I thought I had been looking at the guys that I was interacting with in that light of like, okay, is he gonna be my future husband or not? Like, I'm always looking,
Yep.
because I desire to be married, I do, but in looking at that, I'm not actually viewing them as like
Somebody else's potentially.
potential
Yeah.
thing. So that through that whole process of dating to marry, it's, I'm dating to see if this is the person that I am going to marry.
Hmm.
And if it's not, then this is somebody else's future husband or wife.
Yeah.
And I need to be respectful of that.
Hmm.
So for me, boundaries are like an incredibly important thing. And establishing those from the beginning, whatever.
So important. And I also think establishing boundaries, especially like for me, whenever my last relationship, we had the boundaries talk really early on, which I was like very intimidated by. I mean, it's very against our culture to just talk about those kind of things from the beginning.
Yeah.
But I also think it creates this level of respect that wouldn't be there if you didn't establish them in the first place. I think they're super important. And I think another important thing to know is like the goal of the relationship shouldn't be how far can I go? It should be, how can I glorify God best?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I think we can kind of like get to this point and, whatever. And I think it's more so like, how can we glorify God best? Like, what boundaries can we put in place that like, we're both comfortable with, that we both don't feel like something, it could take us to another place,
Right.
just establishing those and talking about it. I just think it establishes this respect, and it also kind of gives you this groundwork that's just like, we want to glorify God in everything we do from the beginning.
Yep.
And I think that's a very, very important thing. And I also wanted to add in too, with just the whole dating to marry thing, something I've been learning a lot is there's a difference between walking like a girlfriend and walking like a wife.
Yes.
Which is, I'd never heard that before. And someone had said that to me and I was like, what? Like, what's, like, what's the difference? And as I started to kind of ponder, I was like, holy crap, obviously I desire marriage, but I haven't been walking like a wife. I've been walking like a girlfriend. I've just been wanting to, go on dates and, be the girlfriend in the passenger seat of the truck and take all the cute pictures,
get flowers.
All the things. And that's not walking like a wife. Like, there's a very big difference. And in your preparation season for that person, I think it's important to, figure out, okay, how can I start walking in a way that's glorifying to God? And how can I start walking in a way that I'm walking like a wife? Those are two very different things.
Yeah. And it does start with that respect.
It does.
Because respect in a marriage, like actually valuing the other person properly, is just so incredibly important. And we've covered, like this idea in your head versus reality. We've covered, like what to look for and whatever else.
Yep.
But it's really important to just understand, like, I'm going to be fulfilling this role. And it's laid out clearly in scripture. You can look in First Peter, you can look, in Titus, you can look anywhere where it lays out the roles for marriage and God's view of marriage, so that you can actually start fulfilling that role. You can start your patience and your long suffering and your, working well with other people and managing a household, or holding down a steady job for the guys, like just these different aspects of building a solid marriage that leads both individuals towards Christ is just so important from the get-go, which starts with that respect and those boundaries and the important conversations that need to happen first before you add all the floaty feelings.
Yeah. And I think one of the last things I want to cover before this episode, because I don't even know how long this episode's been going, but we can talk. So one thing I talked to Julie about is from a pretty early on age, I did struggle a lot with just the whole concept of like this, like the fear of commitment, almost like, well, if I, start dating this person, like what happens if there's somebody better? And we talked about this, and just like, it's very easy to get into this headspace of like, what if there's somebody better? What if, they're not the picture perfect person I'd imagined for myself? And Julie had some very great words on this.
Well, the simple statement that I shared with Maddie is, Jesus isn't looking for another church to replace you when you mess up. Like, if a marriage is supposed to reflect the relationship between Christ and the church, then in going along with that analogy, when the church messes up, is Jesus just going to abandon his church? No, absolutely not. There's that constant pursuit that Christ has for us, that love that's driving him towards us, the love that we have for God driving us towards him. If you have this, Jesus isn't looking for something better to come along.
Right.
We are the something better. We are his creation. We are made to be righteous. We're made to be his ambassadors, his representatives. There's a verse in scripture that says that when we were created, we were made a little lower than the angels, which just means we live here on earth. Like, we were created in the image of God. We are created with a valuable identity, and God wants that for us. He wants that relationship with us. So in looking at the marriage relationship, that fear of commitment, or that fear of like, what if something better comes along? Your person is the something better. Like, what you have right now is what is better, because that's what God has for you. And as Jesus is pursuing you, and I could go on all day about this. But that pursuit of Christ towards his church is never going to stop. He is never going to stop pursuing you. And that is the best thing, to be pursued by God himself, the God who loves you more than anyone else. That is the God that we serve. And that is so cool.
How freaking good is that? Whenever I remember, we're eating crumble cookies. I don't even know. I'm sure when she told me that, I was like, wow. Like when she had said that to me, and because it's still something I still, struggle with a little bit is like, well, what if there is? I'm a very so what if anxious kind of gal. And ever since she said that, whenever I start to have that thought, it's like, no, but that's what Julie had said. I just think about it and I'm like, he's not looking for somebody better. Like he could, want a different church. He could want a better church, but he doesn't because he chooses to love us, which is that unconditional love we talk about. So I think it's such a beautiful thing. And that is just such a good word. Like, wow. Still, like to this day, I'm like, oh, wow, so good.
It gives you chills, doesn't it?
It does, because it's just so good. Yeah. But I am so glad that you have come on to the podcast. I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode. If you would, please leave a comment down below. Maybe you could just share, one of your favorite parts, one of the things we talked about. Share it with your friends, if you want, you can go to my website. If you want to find more Radiate Your Faith content or buy a t-shirt, whatever you want to do, all that's on there. But I am so grateful you guys were on the podcast and I hope you were encouraged to radiate your faith.